Welcome to the 14th episode of Nature Aventure Service podcast.
Nature,
Aventure,
survie.
There's often a misunderstanding of what is survival and what is bushcraft. Today my guest is a British bushcraft instructor.
D'abord, nous allons finir par mourir de soif sur ce fichu rafio.
si ça continue, capitaine, nous serons bientôt au régime du docteur Bombard.
Ouais.
Wilson! Wilson!
Well, today my guest is Paul Kirtley. Paul Kirtley is known on the internet to be one of the most famous British bushcraft instructor. So hello, Paul.
Hi, Alban. How are you today?
Fine. I've got a cold, so that's why my voice is a bit strange today.
Okay.
But you're doing fine, right?
I'm very well, thank you. Yes. I've just come back. I was in Scotland for a month, and so I'm just back at home now this week. First week at home for over a month, so just enjoying being at home and catching up with a little bit of work and speaking with you, and all those sorts of things. So it's a nice opportunity to change pace this week a little bit.
Yeah, I love Scotland. Where were you?
I was up primarily near the Cairngorm Mountains, which is one of the famous mountain areas of Scotland. It has some of the highest continuous ground, so it's a subalpine plateau up on the top, which makes it quite interesting from both a weather perspective and also in terms of the environment, in terms of the plants and the trees. It's quite unique to the UK. But I was primarily working lower down, so we were working on some filming the first week, and then we also every year we run some canoe trips on the River Spey, which starts just below the Cairngorm Mountains and runs north pretty much to the coast above Aberdeen and out to the sea. So we do a really nice trip where we basically start in the mountains and we end up at the beach, basically at the sea. So and it's a trip that we do over the course of a week with customers. So we do two of those, and then I was also working with a friend of mine who is a hunter. He's a professional hunter. He's a deer stalker, and I went and spent some time with him as well. So it was quite a varied trip and really nice as well. And the weather has been fantastic. It's been so warm for October. It's been like summer. It's crazy.
Not too much rain?
Not very little, and that was a little bit of a problem on the canoe trips because the river was quite low. The first week was okay. We had some rain, just a little bit of rain early on, and that brought the river level up because it comes out of the mountains. It has quite a large catchment area, so you have a little bit of rain over a large area, and it all comes down into the river. So it can bring the river up, quite a few centimeters, even just with a little bit of rain in the mountains. But then the second week was less water because it had been so much sunshine. So it was it became a little bit more like a slalom, where you're having to go around the rocks, and it becomes more technical in terms of moving, but easier in terms of volume of water. So both trips were different, and that's one of the things I like about that trip, is that every time you go down the river, people say, oh well, isn't it the same every time? And it isn't. It's even from one week to the next, it's different.
And we could follow your adventures on the internet, on Facebook, on Frontier Bushcraft, because you are a bushcraft instructor, right?
Yes, indeed. So don't get the impression. I mean, I am qualified as a canoe leader as well, but my core focus is teaching people bushcraft and survival skills as well, but I like to sort of center it on bushcraft, because I think a lot of the time the difference between whether or not you're using something in a modern context as bushcraft or you're using it as a survival skill, it's largely down to context. It depends on the situation that you're in. The skills are often the same. You know, if you think about your fire lighting skills, if you're in a difficult situation in the outdoors and you really, really need a fire to stay warm because you've become wet through, or you've fallen out of your canoe, for example, or your friend is becoming hypothermic and you need to get a fire going, then it's a survival skill. But if you're just making a journey and you're camping and you're hiking or making a canoe journey and you just want to have a fire for cooking as part of your regular routine, then it's a bushcraft skill. So, but it's the same skill set. It's the same fundamental skill that you carry in your muscles and in knowledge that you carry in your head. It's just the application is somewhat different because the context is different. So I like to say, you know, I teach bushcraft, but I'm also aware that it needs to be taught in a way that people can use it in situations that are more critical for those skills to work as well.
So how did you become a bushcraft instructor? I think you haven't always worked outdoors, right?
That's correct. I've always had a passion for the outdoors. I grew up in the countryside. I was born in Yorkshire, which is in the north of England, in quite a rural area. And then my father and mother wanted to move to North Wales. They really liked the mountains and the forests of North Wales. And my father had a job opportunity in North Wales, so we moved there when I was 5. And again, we were in quite a rural area, and we were always walking in the forest and going in the mountains, and that was kind of a formative part of my childhood. It really set my course for loving the outdoors. But then my father changed jobs again, and we moved back to the north of England, and again in a very rural area, but not so many mountains, not so many forests there. But I was still always outdoors. And then I went to university in Scotland and fell in love with the mountains and the glens of Scotland. And then I studied mathematics at university, so I didn't have any money when I left university. Nobody had ever really made it clear to me that you could have a career working in the outdoors as an outdoor instructor. I'd always been, as well as being active, I used to really like mountain biking and hiking and all of those sorts of things when I was in my late teens and early 20s. Even though I'd always been active, I was also quite academic. I studied mathematics at university, and so I then went down a career path of working in numerate disciplines where I was working in an office, and that ultimately didn't suit me very well. And in a parallel track, I also became involved over the years in assisting Ray Mears on some of his courses. I started off by just being a customer, but by being a student of his on courses that he was running. And then after several years of going back repeatedly and doing many of his courses, he asked if I would like to assist him on some of the courses in the UK. So I started doing that in 2003. And then in 2005, he offered me a full-time job because his bushcraft school was growing, his popularity on television was growing. He had less time to run the courses himself, and he needed somebody to help run that bushcraft school. So that's what I went to do full-time back in 2005. So that was 10 years ago. And so my career has changed, and that's one of the wonderful things about, I think, the age that we live in, that you can change career. You know, you can start off on one path and you can pivot at some point. You can change direction and follow what your real passion is. And as I say, the outdoors was always my real passion. It's always been there in my life. I've always spent my weekends and holidays doing things outdoors. And then when I had the opportunity to take it up as a career, I grabbed that opportunity, and I've been doing it ever since. So. Yeah, no, it's interesting. Somebody asked me a little while ago about, how is it that, you're a maths, how did you turn from a maths guy into a bushcraft guy? And I said, well, actually, I think the commonality there is a curiosity about how the world works, how nature works. I think a lot of people are frightened of mathematics because they had a bad experience with it at school, and they think they're not very good at it, and they have a certain view of what mathematics is. But when you study mathematics a bit more and you also look at the history of mathematics, and there are many famous French mathematicians, Descartes and Laplace and all of those guys, they were very, very curious about how the world worked, and they were trying to describe what they were seeing in quite formal ways, but they were trying to describe what they were seeing about the way that the world worked. And whether it was liquids or gravity or any of these things, and I think the same thing with biology. I used to enjoy biology at school, and I think geology as well. It's just you have that curiosity about the world and how it's made and how it's formed and how it interacts, and that carries across to many of the subjects that sit under the umbrella of bushcraft as well. Botany to me is a really important part of a deeper knowledge of bushcraft, because the core raw materials, if you like, that you're working with a lot of the time are trees and plants and animals, and you need to be able to identify them and understand the properties of those. And if you can't identify trees and plants, then you can't identify the raw materials that you need to start with in the first place.
So what is your personal definition of bushcraft?
My personal definition of bushcraft, well, I kind of alluded to that a little bit in the previous conversation, that I think at the core of bushcraft it's a knowledge of nature, and it's a knowledge of the natural world, but it's a practical knowledge that allows you to make use of natural resources that are around you to help you sustain yourself, to help you make your way in the natural world, in the outdoors. So a practical application would be knowing, you mentioned birch, is knowing that birch is very good in many different aspects of firelighting. In particular, the bark is very good. It contains oils. It can be prepared in a way that will accept a spark. The small twigs are very good. They remain on the tree often. They can be snapped off. They can be used as kindling. And that's a very, very simple knowledge, but you have to be able to identify the birch tree, and you have to know that those particular parts of the birch tree are the most useful parts for particular aspects of your firelighting. And that's before we start looking at the fact that the leaves have got saponins in them, so they can be used as a natural soap. The roots are very good for bindings. The wood can be carved quite easily. Sometimes, if it's in the right condition, it can be used for friction firelighting. And there are many other uses of birch as well, from extracting the oil from the bark to make what's sometimes referred to as Russian oil. It's a very, very useful tree, but many people consider it to be a weed. You get an old railway yard that isn't used anymore. It fills up with birch trees. People see it as an invasive weed, whereas in fact it's, to people who know, it's a very, very useful species. And to me, that's the core of bushcraft. It isn't about which tarp that you use or which knife that you use, because I've travelled quite a lot, and one of the examples that I use are there are very, very few tribes of real hunter-gatherers left in the world, and the one real true tribe of hunter-gatherers that are left in Africa, the Hadza, you visit them and it's a very humbling experience, because they have nothing, really, by our modern standards. They have absolutely no material possessions, coming from a country like the UK or a country like France, and you go there and you see that they basically they have maybe a pair of sandals. They have some shorts, whereas traditionally they would have worn more of a sort of loincloth, but they have access to a few things now. So they have shorts, they have a bow and arrow which they've made, they have a fire stick like a hand drill, they'll have some sort of knife, but they're very, very cheap. They'll have traded for them. It's the sort of knife that people who call themselves bushcraft people or bushcrafters or survival instructors in Western Europe, they would be embarrassed to have those knives, because they're so cheap and the steel is soft and they're not always particularly sharp. And yet they're living off the land. In reality, they're not romantically pretending. They can actually live off the environment that they live in. And of course, some of that's environment specific, but they have, they might have a cooking pot at their camp. They probably have a grinding stone where they grind a few things near to their shelter. They live in shelters, the sort of thing that you might teach on a bushcraft course. But they go out and hunt, they go out and gather, they live in a very simple way. They can light fire at will by hand drill. They carry their hand drill with their bows and arrows, and they don't even have a quiver. They don't even have a container for their arrows. They just carry them in their hand. They've got very, very few material possessions. And if you look at it academically, if you look at it from an anthropological point of view, anthropologists rank native peoples in terms of their material culture, in terms of how complex those material cultures are, and it's no judgment, it's just a statement that the Hadza have a very simple material culture. And by contrast, you might look at, say, the Inuit in northern Canada, who have a very complex material culture. They're making harpoons, they're making kayaks, they're living with very, very few material resources, and yet have quite complex systems of surviving in that environment with a harsh cold. Whereas the Hadza have a very, very simple setup, and yet they have an intimate knowledge of their environments. They know every single tree, every single plant, when it can be used, what it can be used for. I remember them telling me about a particular type of fig that they know is ripe when the ants are behaving in a certain way and starting to eat this fig. They know they can recognize a particular withered vine and dig down and find a particular root for the carbohydrate, which is one of their fallback foods. It's just such a detailed, intimate knowledge, but it all comes down to knowing the trees and the plants and the animals. It's nothing about the equipment. It's nothing about modern tarps and expensive knives. And, that to me is really the epitome of bushcraft. That's what it is. It's that knowledge of the environment and the ability to use it practically.
And what is, in your opinion, the most important goal of bushcraft? Is it to reconnect with nature, with our ancestors, or simply to have fun?
Well, I think it can be all of those things, and I think to a certain extent it's a personal thing. If we're looking at it from a modern outdoors perspective, I think it can be just for fun. I think it can be. I think it has an important role in introducing young people to a better appreciation of nature and just getting them interacting with the world. I don't personally have a problem with electronics and phones and computers. I think they're like anything else. They're a tool that you can use. So I don't have a problem per se with kids having phones, but I also have. I think there's also a need for people to stay in contact with the natural world, because if we don't stay in touch with it, we don't value it. And I think there are many parts of our world now that we're damaging, and we're allowing to be damaged because it's away from where we live. We're extracting resources, and they're being damaged because people don't care about them, or not enough people care about them. And so I think it's important for people from an environmental point of view, for people to grow up caring about nature and understanding nature and appreciating nature. I think there's plenty of research that suggests that if you spend time outdoors and you spend time in green environments and you spend time interacting and appreciating nature, that you feel happier, healthier, it lowers your blood pressure. So there are health benefits as well of just getting people involved. So I think it's important to get young people involved from an early age, and I think teaching them bushcraft skills is one way of doing that. I think there's also, to a certain extent, a sort of historical perspective as well, in that you're trying to preserve some skills that may otherwise die out, and I feel quite strongly about that, and I think we're actually doing quite a good job. I remember 20 years ago when I first really started to become properly interested in learning bushcraft skills. I'd been interested in survival skills when I was a boy and as a teenager, but I didn't, I looked at it from the perspective of having read a few books and tried a few things. But when I actually wanted to start learning the skills myself, there were very, very few people who understood that people could still light fire by friction, by rubbing sticks together. And I remember when I went on a course, I'd never seen anybody do bow drill before. And this is before YouTube, and this is before much sharing on the internet. The internet was still something that maybe people had at work, but maybe didn't have so much at home, certainly didn't have in a phone in their hand. And so people's familiarity with these basic skills was not so great, and the widespread ownership of those skills was quite low as well. Whereas I think now, sort of 15, 20 years later, there are many people who even aren't that interested in bushcraft know that people can still light fires by rubbing sticks together, by friction, and also there are many more people who can do that. So I think there has been a resurgence in the widespread ownership of some of these skills, and that's good, because otherwise they die out, and you never know. We talked about survival situations a little bit earlier. You never know when these things can be useful to you. So I think there's that a little bit is important as well. For me, in teaching people, it's not just about fun, it's also about preserving a skill set. And then I think also, we do then also appreciate people like the Hadza who are still living closer to the land. It gives you that connection. So I think the goal can be varied. I think in terms of an individual wanting to learn the skills, we get a lot of adults coming to do our courses, and their motivations are varied. We ask people at the beginning of courses, why are you here and what would you like to gain from this course? And a lot of people say that they feel disconnected from nature. They've spent their lives, like we've already talked about, working in an office, and they feel disconnected, and they want to have a greater connection with nature, a greater connection with the outdoors. Some people have young families, and they want to be able to take their children into the woods and know more about the woods, and so that's a large motivation for a lot of people. And then there are people who are wanting to travel to wild and remote parts of the world and want to have these skills as something that they can use, or as something that they can fall back on as almost like an emergency skill set, but they still see them as valuable. So there are a lot of reasons why people want to learn these skills, and there's nothing wrong with learning this stuff for fun. There's nothing wrong with learning this for reasons of making sure that you're going to stay safe in the outdoors. There's nothing wrong with learning because you want to know more about nature and you want to be more connected, and it certainly does that job. Some people like to come on our courses and switch their telephone off for the whole week and not have any connection and just completely unplug. And I think there are more and more people using both bushcraft courses, but also just camping in woodlands or camping in the mountains as an opportunity to switch off from all the distraction and all the noise. So I think that there are many, many reasons why people want to both teach bushcraft but also want to learn it as well. I can't say that anyone is right or anyone is wrong, because they're all valid. So.
And tell me if you agree, but I feel that bushcraft is also a great way to build awareness for natural resources. In my last courses last year, I had a family, and they were like this family was like a wild boar. They were working all over the place, crushing plants, etc. And in the end of the course, after 2 days in the nature, they were, oh shoot, I won't walk here because there are nettles, and I know that nettles are useful to make fibers or to eat, etc. So I believe there's a strong connection that's, people gain awareness of natural resources.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right, and I've experienced the same thing. People come into the woods and they're standing on things and they're not really taking care as to where they put their feet or they put down their rucksack, and then after a few days of teaching them about everything from fire to wild foods, and I think particularly when you start teaching people, all of this plant and this plant you can eat, this can be used for medicine, this can be used for this, they then see that as valuable. And I think particularly with the foods, so nettles, they can be used for food, but they have other uses as well, of course. I think you're absolutely right that people then are very careful about where they put their feet, because they're standing on food, they're standing on something useful, they're standing on something valuable. And I think as well, people also slow down a little bit. People come to the woods often, and this is a generalization, but it's often true, that people come from they have a busy life, they, particularly when they're coming to do a course, they may have had to be in a little bit of a rush to get there, or they've just finished work on a Friday evening or whatever, but they've come and their focus isn't completely on one thing. They're thinking about what they've just been doing at work, or they're thinking about what they have to do when they get back on Monday, or if it's just a weekend course, and their brain is a little bit distracted. They're used to having emails and text messages and SMS and Twitter and everything kind of, very small attention, and then they come to the woods and they turn that off, and they're focusing on one thing at a time. And it may be, particularly if they're using a knife, they really have to focus on being safe and being careful. And then you're showing them one thing at a time and getting them to undertake particular tasks, and they're focused on that, and they're working with other people. They're working with other people in person, so they're actually interacting with other people on a one-to-one level, rather than interacting with them via email or messaging. And they slow down to a more natural pace. They become more calm, they become more focused, and they take more of their surroundings in, because they're not filtering. We spend so much time filtering out noise. We walk down the street in the city, and there's lots of noise from a police siren and a car driving past and a scooter and people shouting at one another that has nothing to do with you, and people on working on a building site, or all of these things going around all the time, and we filter it out. And then when you come to the woods for a few days and you're in the forest, and you start to lower that filter, and you start to hear the birds in the morning and hear the mouse rustling in the leaves, and it raises awareness in that way, so they become more open, and that you are teaching them about the environment, and so they become much more tuned in to that particular environment. And I think that's an important thing, because they feel better for it. And so then if you can give them that attachment to spending some time in nature, that it makes them feel better, that's a good thing, I think.
And being outside, what do you like the most? Is it the thrill of an adventure? Is it just because you like being outdoors? You like getting wet under the rain?
I don't know if I like getting wet under the rain, but it's part and parcel of being outdoors. I think you have to just be, again, it's about how we live our normal lives. I think a lot of people, to begin with, they get frustrated. Oh, it's raining today, or there are these insects biting me, or whatever it is. But that's just part of being outdoors. That's nature. Nature will do what nature does, and I think it gives you more acceptance and more humility about yourself, for starters, which you just have to come from that perspective. Otherwise you become very frustrated, you become angry, people, things are biting me, or you just say, well, that's part of it, and I will try and minimize that, but don't get irritated or angry with the conditions. You just have to be accepting. So that's part of it. But what I enjoy is the fact that I do lots of different things outdoors, but if I had to generalize, I think what I like about going to wilder places is that you become reliant upon your own skills and your own knowledge. And whether that's making a hiking trip where you have to navigate and you have to make sure that you get to where you need to get to each day and camp and those things, and that's down to you. Nobody else is going to do that for you. Lighting a fire, you have to make that work. It either works or it doesn't. Making a canoe trip, you have to stay safe, you have to not fall in or drown, or make sure that you make sensible decisions about what you do at a particular set of rapids, whether you paddle the rapids, whether you walk the boat around, you portage, or whether you line the boat, so you're walking down the bank and taking the boat on a rope. And that's about preserving the boat, it's about preserving your equipment, it's about preserving yourself. That judgment and that skill in making a journey or making a good camp is down to you. And that's one of the things I really like about it, is that you're more accountable for your success or not than much of what we do in modern life. Much of what we do in modern life, we can get away with being a little bit late, or not finding our phone, or not finding our car keys for 10 minutes, or whatever it is. We get away with a lot of slackness, whereas once you're outside, nature doesn't really care about you. It doesn't dislike you, it doesn't like you, it just does its own thing, and you have to look after yourself in amongst that. And that's what I like that accountability. But also I feel more comfortable outdoors. I like the fresh air in my lungs, I like being physically active, I like the sun on my face, I like the rain on my face, I like climbing mountains, I like paddling on rivers, I like hiking, I like sitting under a tarp with a fire going when it's raining and feeling comfortable and warm. I like all of those experiences, and I like the experiences, the encounters with nature. So, for example, we did a canoe trip in Canada recently, and we came around a corner. There was a lot of reeds and some wild rice on the edges of this river. And in amongst the reeds, as we came around the corner, was a moose, and he was there, up to, almost up to his neck in water, and he was chewing on the reeds. And he was, a little bit disturbed by us, but he wasn't, because we were in a canoe, and there were only 3 canoes on the river, and we were quite quiet. We got quite close to him, and we took some nice photographs, and it was just a really nice encounter. And unless you go to those places, you don't have those experiences. So those experiences to me are, they're invaluable. Just having that relationship with nature, just being accepting of the weather and the insects, and sometimes you're a little bit uncomfortable, but that's all part of it. That to me is what I like about it.
And what doesn't kill you makes you stronger, right?
Well, yeah. So Nietzsche's little saying there has become widely used, but I think that's true. I think going and making journeys in the outdoors does make you stronger. Physically fitter. It makes you mentally stronger, and you can bring that back to your everyday life as well. And you can use that in everything that you do, whether it's business or keeping fit because you're going to make another trip, or you value your physical fitness more, you value those experiences, you can share those experiences with other people as well. And yeah, absolutely, it's a positive virtuous circle, that if you're going outdoors and you're doing whatever activity it is, whether it's mountain biking or trail running or hiking or canoeing, or even just going out and having a camp and practicing skills, it's all physical to a lesser or greater degree, and that's something that we don't often do in our people are teaching in classrooms and working in offices and all those things. So I think it's really, really valuable from a health perspective, and it's good from a focus perspective as well. You stay mentally more focused, I think, all of the time. Those things that you learn, those ways of thinking that you get from being outdoors, you can bring back, and it enriches all of your life. So yeah, it does make you stronger. And obviously the really difficult situations give you the most perspective. But I've had some difficult situations in the outdoors, and most of the long career outdoor professionals that I know. They've all had their difficult situations in the outdoors where things haven't gone to plan and things have become really quite difficult, and even to the point where they felt like their lives are at risk. But those again are experiences that you can draw from in terms of what you do in the future. I think most people who make good decisions in the outdoors, so you look at outdoor leaders. So I work with a guy called Ray Goodwin, and I've worked with other people as well who have made journeys for many, many years. And people who are good at making good decisions, that's based on a long time of making some bad decisions, but learning from those bad decisions. And so it makes you stronger from that perspective as well, definitely.
Yeah, and I remember midges from Scotland, and now mosquitoes are just a joke. So it didn't kill me, but made me stronger. Besides that,
midges are a particular. They're a particular pest. I mean, I've spent a good amount of time in Canada, and where the mosquitoes can be pretty bad in June, especially. The same in northern Scandinavia, in northern Sweden. It's this very similar environment to parts of Canada, and you get those swampy areas, and the mosquitoes can be horrible. But there is still nothing like the Scottish midge for just being so irritating. They're just quite incredible, when they're getting in your eyes and they're going up your nose and in your ear. It's not just them biting you, it's just the volume of them. You feel like sometimes you can't breathe because you get so many, in your mouth and in your nose. It's just horrible. Yeah.
I remember that night near the Loch Lomond in Scotland. And, it was so hard getting asleep.
Yes. Yeah. No, they're incredible. They're absolutely
that was amazing.
Incredible. Yeah.
There's often a common confusion between two words, bushcraft and survival. For instance, in France, we don't have bushcraft school yet. We just have survival school. What is the difference?
I think there are a couple of differences. I think the key difference...
Wilson! Je suis désolé! Excuse-moi!
This is the end of the first part of our interview with Paul Kirtley. You can find him on his blog, paulkirtley.co.uk. In the next episodes, we'll be talking about differences between bushcraft and survival, of course, but also about the gear that you should take or should not take on the field. You can find us on our blog, natureaventuresurvie.blogspot.com, or on our Facebook page, and on our YouTube channel, Nature Aventure Survie. Stay tuned for new episodes of the podcast. Have a good day, have a good bushcraft.
Ah!